Welcome back to another reading of The World Don't Know This Jesus. It is written by Samuel Harris, and it is the life story and true testimonies of the Goff family, Larry Goff and his family. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 15 of 21. There's a total of 21 chapters, and I have done previous videos on these, reading these different chapters, and so we're on chapter 15, almost done with the book, and I believe there's another book that came out not too long ago. So chapter 15, the fishing village the Goff settled in was on the west coast of Nicaragua. The name of the village was Cáceres. As they came into Cáceres, the Lord led them to a small cafe where he had prepared the way for them. The people there had been praying that God would send a Christian missionary to them. They graciously provided a place for the family to sleep and kept them well fed. For the entire time that they were there in Cáceres, they would occasionally return to the big house in Mazatepe to wash clothes and freshen up. It was on one of these trips back to Mazatepe that Queenie was killed. Larry soon connected with some of the fishermen and began to go with them in their dugout boat out into the ocean. There was a man who owned and steered the boat when they went out. The other men would paddle and would often go several miles into the ocean. Sometimes the fishing was incredible, and there are some very good pictures of Larry and the men proudly showing off their catches with Queenie next to them. The man who owned the boat was given 10% of the day's catch. Larry would give his share to the owners of the cafe for the room and board that they received. One time, they caught a huge sea bass that weighed over 250 pounds. This was an extraordinary catch that fed several families for days. There is a very good picture of this shown on the Goff Ministries website. You can find that at goffministries.org. There's also some other interesting audio clips on there. The men soon began to tell Larry about a man who lived on a tall hill outside the village in a large mansion. They told him that this was a powerful and very wealthy man. As Larry asked questions about the man and what they knew about him, he soon learned they were in great awe of him. These poor fishermen greatly envied the rich and powerful man who lived in the mansion on the hill. Larry was very intrigued by this man and asked many questions about him. Had any of the fishermen ever been to the house? Had anyone ever met the man? What was the man's name, and why was he so rich and powerful? The fishermen assured Larry that it was impossible to know these things. The house was heavily guarded. And the house and hill that it stood on were like a fortress. After a few days of fishing and hearing about the rich man on the hill, Larry knew he had to meet this man. That's why I laughed and paused, because it seems like every single time that Larry's told he can't do something, he can't go somewhere, that's exactly what he does. Larry Goff knows the sound of his first voice, and one morning he heard that voice very clearly. Today is the day you go up the hill. Obedience is the key to continue hearing that voice, and Larry did not hesitate or procrastinate. There was no road or even a trail to follow, and this was a long climb and a steep hill. After several hours of hiking and climbing, Larry finally came to the top and came face to face with two snarling Doberman pinschers. Fortunately, there was a wrought iron fence around the house, behind which the dogs were standing. But this meant that for Larry to get to the house, he had to enter the gate and deal with the dogs. The front door of the huge mansion was now directly in his view, but these watchdogs were very intent on making sure he did not get any closer. With the dog staying right next to him and growling their warnings, Larry quietly began to pray and make his way toward the house. The dogs continued to make threatening sounds, but did not bite or attack him. Angels that Larry could not see, but perhaps the dogs could, must have stood between Larry and these trained killers. Without the Lord's protection, these two Dobermans could and would have ripped Larry to pieces. No wonder the fishermen were afraid to approach the man who lived in the mansion. It was protected like a military compound. Finally, Larry was on the porch and in front of the massive door that had a large metal knocker on it. As Larry banged on the door with the knocker, a butler opened the door with a very surprised look on his face. "How did you get up here, and how did you make it past those killer dogs? Who are you, and what business do you have with the man of the house?" Larry could see into the house, and behind the butler he could see a long, winding stairway. Larry informed the butler that he was there to see the owner of the house. There was a sash hanging near the door, which the butler pulled. By this time, Larry had made his way into the house and could see how opulent everything was. The ceiling was very high, and a very large, elaborate chandelier hung from above. Soon a man appeared at the top of the stairway and began to descend. The first words out of the man's mouth were, "I can't even kill myself." The man was holding a whiskey bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other. "I've been trying to get drunk enough to pull the trigger, but I can't do it. I have it all, wealth, women, and I own an eighth of Nicaragua, but life isn't worth living." Larry asked if they could sit down and talk and inform the man that God had sent him with the message. Of course, this man could tell that Larry was an American, and like the butler, must have wondered how in the world Larry could have gotten to the top of the hill and past the killer dogs. The rich man told Larry that he was one of Somoza's top generals, but that life had lost all appeal to him. Once again, he said, "I just want to die." To this, Larry responded that was exactly what he needed to do, die, but told him there's another way. You need to die and be born again, which is a much better way to die. As these two men, one with all the power and wealth of this world and the other with the key to eternal life, sat on the couch together, the general was led to give his heart and life to Jesus. With the whiskey bottle and gun on the floor next to them, the man cried out to God, confessed his sins, and asked for forgiveness, and that Christ be Lord of his life. "This is what I've been looking for," the man shouted. He immediately got up and went looking for something. As he returned, he opened his checkbook and started writing out a check payable to Larry Goff. "With as many zeros as you want to include," he told Larry. Very firmly, Larry told him, "Thanks, but no thanks. This is something you can't buy." As the general tried to reason with Larry that he must need money for his missionary work, Larry was able to explain that what he had just received was free, and to try and put a monetary value to it would be a disgrace to the one who paid the price for all our sins. Larry did tell him that there was something he could do, though. As he told the powerful general how he had heard about him, he said, "If this is real, you must tell people about it." When Jesus truly comes into your heart, you have a testimony and it must be shared. This has been the mantra of Larry Goff's life. There is no shame in confessing Jesus to those who belong to him. The general then told Larry that he often watched these fishermen from his perch high on the hill above. He actually marveled at the strength and determination they had to go out in the ocean day after day and face the danger of the ocean and waves. These poor fishermen might have envied the general, but little did they know the hollowness of his own life. The general readily agreed to come to a bar in Cáceres the next evening at 6 o'clock. When Larry returned to the village and began to tell the story, the people couldn't believe it. "He won't really come. There's no way," was their response. As the fishermen of the village crowded in at the bar the next evening, a luxury car pulled up right at 6 o'clock. To everyone's amazement, out stepped the rich man who lived in the big house on the hill. The crowd parted to allow him to come in the bar, where he shared his story just as Larry had told it to them. He told them that life had lost its value and that he wanted to die. That a man of God appeared at his door and shared with him that he did need to die and be born again, and he had. This testimony from this man to these poor fishermen who had stood in awe and envied him started a revival and ultimately a church in Cáceres. In this new gathering of believers was a lady who taught Larry and Betty a new song, which they still sing. The church began to flourish and was attended by not just the women and children, but also those rough, tough fishermen. Jesus' original disciples were made up of mostly fishermen, and now there was a new group that called him Lord and Master. There was another remote village that the people of Cáceres told Larry about. There was no road to this village, so Larry walked there one day, not sure if he could get there in his truck. As he walked into the village, he noticed an old man sitting behind a fence, and he wouldn't look at Larry. Larry spoke to the man saying, "Good morning," or "Buenos dias." The man did not respond or even look at Larry. He thought that was rude, so he stopped and spoke again to the man. A little girl, maybe the man's granddaughter, was nearby and told Larry that the man was deaf. Larry, feeling a bit guilty for his presumption, prayed for the man for his healing and then continued on into the village. He began to see many statues and graven images and knew he needed to share the gospel to these people. On his walk to the village, Larry had determined that he could get his truck there. He decided to return to Cáceres and come back in his truck with a generator and projector and show the film he still had, I Beheld His Glory, that night in the village. That night, it seemed that everyone in the entire village came to see the movie. When the film ended, Larry asked the crowd if anyone wanted to receive Jesus. Every single person there raised their hand, 100%. As the people began to come forward for prayer, Larry recognized the old man he had prayed for and his granddaughter. They had huge smiles on their faces, and Larry soon heard why. This man had been deaf for many, many years. Everyone in the village knew that and had heard that Larry had prayed for him to receive his hearing. Because of that testimony, they all wanted to know this Jesus. As Larry prepared to leave, the old man came running out with a gift. He had 5 ears of field corn and wanted Larry to have them. This may have been the only thing he had of value, and he wanted Larry to have it. Every time Larry has told me this story, his eyes get a little misty, and he repeats the same phrase, "What a precious gift." The Gulfs had rented a post office box in Managua when they first entered Nicaragua. This was where the funds were sent that came from supporters back in the States. The Blockers in Midland would send whatever money came in to that P.O. box. Leaving Cáceres, Larry and the family made their way to Managua. To their great surprise, there was a very nice offering waiting for them in their box, the largest they had ever received up to that time. The youth group at the McFarland's church in Midland had gathered an offering of $300. Betty was tired and ready to go home, and to her, this was exactly what they needed. They were also told in Managua that their visas would expire in 3 days and that they must leave before that time. 3 days to leave, $300. In Betty's mind, this was confirmation that it was time to head home, and she was more than ready. There was one other incident that happened while the family was in Nicaragua. Larry remembers this as being in Managua, and there are some very good pictures on the website of this event. One hot day, Larry was walking around in the city and came to a deserted street. As the Lord instructed Ezekiel in the Old Testament to preach to the valley of dry bones, he told Larry to preach to that empty street. Larry began to preach from Hebrews 13:8. The message, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. For some time, no one was there to hear, but then the most unusual thing happened. A very handsome, nicely dressed young man appeared with the Bible in his hand and began to smile at Larry as he preached. Larry didn't know what to think, and the man just continued to smile and encourage Larry by nodding as he preached. Eventually, a group of teenage boys began to gather and started to question and heckle Larry as he delivered the message. If that's true, Jesus is the same today as yesterday, then you should be able to perform the same kind of miracles, they said to Larry. Some of the boys left and returned shortly, dragging through the street a very old man they knew to be completely deaf. They informed Larry that the old man was over 100 years old and had been deaf for a long time. Prove to us what you've been preaching, they challenged Larry. As Larry put his hands on the man's ears and began to pray, the handsome young man with the Bible came and stood next to him. When Larry finished praying and looked up, the old man was raising his hands and praising God. What was also amazing was that a crowd had followed the boys as they dragged the old man through the street. Many others came to be healed and were. Others in the crowd gave their hearts to Jesus and were saved. The Lord had, in fact, shown that He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. To this day, Larry doesn't know where the young man came from. To this day, he feels strongly that he may have been sent specifically to him and may indeed have been an angel or heavenly being. 2 pictures from the incident are shown on the website with a description of what happened that day. What started out as preaching to an empty street resulted in a divine appointment. A group of Nicaraguan teenage boys were able to see the power of God demonstrated very clearly and powerfully. Larry Goff got to see and hear his father say to him very clearly, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That night, after they had received the $300 offering and were making plans to start the long drive back to Texas, something happened that would change everything. As Larry went to bed with thoughts of returning home, a very vivid dream or vision awakened him in the middle of the night. In this vision, Larry clearly saw Amazon Indian-looking people, very scantily dressed and painted. They were painted half red and half yellow with a P over their heads. Larry cannot say if this was a dream or a vision, but that it was very real. Lying in bed, he could not go back to sleep. As he contemplated what he had seen and what the Lord was saying to him, a dread came over him. He knew in his heart that they would not be returning home, but must push farther south toward these people he had seen in the vision. The dread was not from what lay ahead, but from the fact that he had to tell Betty. When Betty woke up that morning and began to talk with Larry, she knew something was up. Larry had prepared his speech and was going on about how beautiful the flowers and trees were around them, how colorful the tropical birds were, and how beautifully they sang. Betty stared daggers through him, and tears began to form in her eyes. "Don't tell me you had a vision," she exclaimed to her husband. "But, sweetheart, I did," Larry replied. He then told Betty the details of the vision and that he thought the P meant Peru. "I think we're supposed to head to Peru. From where they were in Nicaragua, Peru was as far south as Texas was to the north. Instead of going home, they would be going twice as far away from family and loved ones as they currently were." The first song Larry had ever heard so many years before in Kalamazoo, "I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord," was indeed playing out in their lives. They would be out of Nicaragua in 3 days, but they would be traveling south to Costa Rica instead of north toward Texas and home. That ends chapter 15. And I'm not going to give you any spoiler alerts, but it just gets even more crazy toward the end of the book. So chapter 16, I will make that video shortly, and it's gonna be really good, really crazy. I pray that these testimonies and stories are blessing you. Again, they're not just stories, they are actual testimonies that the Goff family has lived out. God used them to do some amazing things. But just like in the story, the chapter I just read, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so in the Old Testament, God did amazing, crazy things. And in the New Testament, He did amazing, crazy things through Jesus. And now today, he's doing amazing, crazy things through Samuel Harris, the Goff family, myself, you, many others. And if he's not doing crazy things through us, then we have to take a look at our lives and say, I serve this same God. How come I'm not experiencing these kinds of things? But you know what? All God wants is a willing heart. He wants our heart. He wants our obedience. He wants our weak little yes. And when we give our weak little yes, he takes that, he multiplies it, and he turns it into his testimonies. So I pray that you will continue to join me for these readings. Be blessed. See you next time.